Okay, so serious, I don't have anybody here, but I do know that I have people who listen later on, so who can't be here at the time the class is actually scheduled. So we're going to get going. You'd have to excuse me a little bit. I don't remember exactly how far we got to. And then last week there was the takala that my computer was making really horrible crackly noises. And so we ended up not actually recording a class. So I think I'm picking up approximately around verse 12. And that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to take it to verse 25 as quickly as I can, which finishes basically that whole chunk, which is what? It's the letter that Daniel has sort of copied over or kept a copy of. It's the letter that Nebuchadnezzar has sent. And so far in the letter, he said, everything was going along great. Like I didn't have a dream because something was on my mind or anything, whatever. I had this dream. I called people to try to tell me what the dream was. Nobody could tell me. Oh, I remembered Daniel is good at doing that. So I called him in. And so we have sort of a question as to like, when exactly is this happening? This particular one, unlike most of the other chapters, this chapter is not dated for us the same way that the other chapters were. The first chapter was dated the 3rd year of Jehoiakim. Maybe it was that didn't actually work out. So we decided it was the 3rd year of Jehoiakim's rebellion against Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar came back and he decided to exile that one and put somebody else in his place and and he took a whole bunch of people to Babel, including Daniel and his friends. And Beit HaMikdash is still standing. There's a different puppet. There's one king of Yehuda who's a captive in Bavel, and there's another king of Yehuda, a relative, who's been appointed by Nebuchadnezzar to rule, etc. We're coming very close to the end. And that was when Daniel showed up, and there was some length of time, 3 years, maybe plus minus, where he was learning the language, and we had all that. That was all in the first chapter. Sometime after that, we don't know exactly how long, okay? Sometime after that comes Nebuchadnezzar's first dream, which was the dream of the statue or the body with the made out of the 4 different kinds of metal. And in that one, so I said we don't know exactly when it was, but in fact, Daniel tells us, right? Because he says that was in Shnat Shtayim L'Malchut Nebuchadnezzar. And that didn't work out either, because Shnat Shtayim L'Malchut Nebuchadnezzar was this dream that would have been before Daniel ever showed up. So that didn't work. So maybe possibility was that it was the 2nd year after the Churban, which actually makes it much later. But we went with that as one possibility. Another possibility was that it was the 2nd year we for sure said it couldn't be the 2nd year that he was the king altogether, because that would have put it before the time that Daniel showed up. It could be that and so we tried as a possibility that it was the second year since the Chorban, and I'm going to suggest now that that's probably also not really good, and that we're going to need to go back to that and revisit that and say that that's also not really a good date. Then we had presumably these things are in the sense, I was initially said that I thought this was in the sense of a diary. Okay. And so they should be in chronological order. The next thing we have this pestle that's made in Dura. Now that, according to most of the Mefarshim, in fact, is after the Chorban, because it's made with the gold, with the excess gold from the Beit HaMikdash. Or maybe it's just made with, Nebuchadnezzar has been taking, what do you call it when you pay money to somebody? It's sort of like protection money. He's been taking money from Yehuda every year, tribute money, protection money, so that he won't attack. And so they have to keep paying him. And a lot of that money, and Tzidkiyahu was sending him money year after year, etc. And a lot of that was coming from the Beit HaMikdash. So it could be that that was the gold that he used for the pestle and Dura, and that it's still, even that story, and so the story with Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, that also took place before the Chorban. It's not clear. Not, because there's no clear definition. There's nothing so far that we've seen in Sefer Daniel after that very beginning part that ties what's going on in Babel when Daniel's there back to things that are taking place or that have taken place in Eretz Yisrael. But let's finish this off at any rate. And then at some point along the way, and Nebuchadnezzar doesn't even bother dating it, certainly not with a date that we would recognize. Nebuchadnezzar sends this letter that he had this dream. He calls in Daniel. He knows about Daniel. He knows Daniel knows how to answer dreams. So presumably this is after the first dream. And he has described the whole dream, and that the whole thing starts off as this dream about this huge tree. And then all of a sudden there's a decree from this angel type figure that the tree is going to be cut down, that it's going to be bound up. And then it switches from being a tree to being something that used to have the heart of a man and now has the heart of an animal, and is going to eat the grass and drink the dew. And that's where we are. Okay. And so that's as far as we got, and that there's going to be a period of seven seasons are going to go over this, and that's as much as Nebuchadnezzar knows. And it's, if he identifies himself either with the tree or with the person who loses his mind and becomes like an animal, it must be very frightening to him. But this is now being told all after the fact. Okay, so he says that's the dream that I, Nebuchadnezzar, saw, and you, Belshazzar, Pishrei Amar Kol Kavel Di Kol Chachimei Malchuti La Yachlin Pishra Lahodatuni Va'anta Kahel Di Ruach Elokim kadishin bach. Okay, this is the dream that I saw. No, none of the other wise men of my kingdom were able to tell me about it, but you, Daniel, you'll be able to tell me. You, Belshazzar, will be able to tell me. Adain Daniel dishmei Belshazzar eshtamem ksha'a chada. And so then Daniel, whose name is also Belshazzar, stood there dumbfounded for about an hour. And his thoughts, Yavalune, and it looked like his thoughts were really troubling him. What is he going to do, right? So Ane Malka, the king, raised his voice for Mar, and he said, Belshazzar, Chamu Pishrei Al Yavaluch, the dream and its solution, right, its interpretation shouldn't scare you so much, okay? It's fine, whatever it is, I'll accept what it is, basically, is what he's saying. But, excuse me, if I have to respond to the dictator of the known world, and I have to tell him bad news, I'm not so sure that I'm going to believe him when he says, don't let it scare you, right? So, but Belshazzar raises up his voice and he says, Mar'i Chelma, let this vision of this dream, Lasanach, let it happen to your enemies, to the ones who hate you. Fishrei Larach, and we talked about, so I know this is a review because I remember saying this. We talked about the fact that there are Mefarshim and in the Gemara, like Mefarshim, okay, who said, how could Daniel have said such a thing? Because who could hate Nebuchadnezzar more than the Jews? And it's like chas v'shalom, Daniel is cursing the Jews. And other people say, no, he was saying it in a way that Nebuchadnezzar could understand. And Nebuchadnezzar would not think that he was applying it to the Jews because the Jews were a totally subjugated people. Whether or not the Beit HaMikdash has been destroyed yet or not is irrelevant. Okay, and let's say that it has been, but even if it's already, but even if it hasn't been, right? Even if it hasn't been, they're totally subjugated. They're paying large amounts of stuff. They don't have an army that can possibly stand up to Nebuchadnezzar's army. He's not going to, your enemies is sort of just a code word for, I'm not wishing this to happen to you. It's going to happen to somebody, obviously. That's what the dream is about, but we don't need it to be happening to you. All right, fine. And then, so now Daniel is now going to give his interpretation. And like I said, I've been avoiding giving Malbim and Ramad Valley, etc.'s interpretation of what this dream is, because I want to hear Daniel's own words first. Ilana di Chazaita, the tree that you saw. Di Rava Utkif, it was so large and strong, tall, right? Verume Yimte Lishmaya, and the top of it reached to the heavens. Vechazote Lekol Ara, and it was possible to see it through the entire world. Va'af Yeshapir Ve'inbe Sagi Mazon Lecholave, and he's just basically repeating over what Nebuchadnezzar had said to him. And, and its branches are beautiful, and its fruit is much, the blossoms of the fruit are very much, and it provides food for everyone. Techotohi, Tedur, Chevat, Bara, and the wild animals dwell beneath it. Uba'an Poyi, Yishkanan, Tzipare Shmaya, and in its branches dwell the birds of the heavens. Adahu Malka di Revat Ut Keft. Okay, it's the same language. You are a king who is Revat Utkev. Notice that's the same language, 2 psukim earlier. The tree which was Reva Utkif. Okay, but now it's instead of third person, it's now in second person. It's really the only change here. It's the same language. Urvutach, ruvat, umutat l'shmaya, v'shaltanach l'sof ara. And your mastery, whatever, is very great. It reaches to the sky, just like the tree reached to the sky, and your authority to the ends of the earth, right? This tree, which was able to be seen through till the end, throughout the entire earth, L'kol ara. So the language is paralleling. In Pasuk 19, Daniel is telling Nebuchadnezzar that this tree is referring to you. Pasuk Kaf. V'di chazamalka ir v'kadish nachit min shmai. He's skipping over the lovely other stuff. Okay. And so there was the next thing that the king saw, which was this ir v'kadish nachit min shmaya, this type of an angel that had both the power to judge, lahashpia somehow, and also the power to execute the judgment. That was, according to Malbim, told us that that's what ir v'kadish meant. Came down from the heavens, v'amar, and it said, Gdo ilana, truncate the tree. V'chablohi, and essentially like wound it, damage it. Baram ikar sharshe ba'ara shvuku. However, the main part of its root should be left in the ground, which means don't uproot it entirely. It's not going to be totally destroyed, right? But it is going to be cut down to size. All right. Ube'asor difarza unachash b'ditha divra. And it should be bound up with iron and copper, right? This is not nachash like the nachash kadmoni, the serpent, but rather this is nachash like nachoshet. So it's a similar word to Hebrew, but not the same thing. Okay. All right. Okay. There we are. Here I am. Okay. And it's going to be in the desha. It's going to be in the grass that's around it, that's outside of it. Ubatal shmaya yitztaban. It's going to be drenched with the dew of the sky, the heavens. V'im chevat bara chalake. And its portion is going to be with the wild animals. Adi Shiva Idanin Yachlafun Alohi, until 7 seasons have passed over it. So now Daniel has to explain what these things are. Dana Pishra Malka. So here is an interpretation. Okay. Gzeirat ilahi di metat al mar'i Malka. And there is, in fact, a supernal decree that reaches to the king himself. V'lach tardin minanashu v'im chevat bara leheve medorach. And you are going to be essentially brought down from the level of being human, and your dwelling is going to be with the wild animals. The isbak torinach, and that's right, the grass of the field, that's going to be your food. Yatamun, that's what you're going to eat. Umetal shmaya lach mitzabin. And from the dew of the heaven, you will be drenched. That's what you're going to drink. V'shiva idanin yachlafun alach. And 7 seasons or 7 years are going to pass over you. Adi tinda di shalit ila b'malchut anasha leman di yitzbe yitnana. Until you really know, deep in your knowing, okay, that there is a supernal ruler who puts over, who rules over the kingdoms of men. And whomever he desires, he gives it to. So if he wants you to be the king, he makes you the king. And if he wants your son, Evel Merodach, to be the king, then Evel Merodach is going to be the king. And if he wants to take it away from Bavel altogether and give it to somebody else, that can happen too. Now, Daniel's not putting all that in. I'm putting some of that in. But basically, Daniel says the point of these 7 years is to drive it home to you that there's somebody else in charge of who gets to be king and who's the ruler. Di amaru lemishpat ikar sharshe di ilana malkuta lach kayama. And the fact that they said, in other words, this ear of a Kaddish from the heavens, that the announcement, the Gzeira, was made from the heavens to leave the main part of the root of the tree, that's coming to tell you that your kingdom will remain yours. Vindi tinda di shaltin shmei. Okay? Until you know that there's a ruler in heaven, but it will be held for you. Okay, there will be somebody, who will take your place for a while, but the kingdom is being held in abeyance for you. You'll come back to it. Okay, lehen malka milki yishparalach. V'chata'ach b'tzedaka puruk v'avyatach b'michan anayin hen teve arka lishlevtach. So he says, but therefore, O king, my king, if you want to put off this decree that's coming, basically, if you want it to be better for you, then you should improve your sin. What does it mean, right? Yishpar chatach. You want it to be better for you. What you need to do is that your sin should be. You should get salvation by means of tzedakah, and your avayat, right? The avut, the corruption, the perversion, whatever that is being accounted to you, should be taken care of by michan aniyin, by keeping the poor alive. And that will give length of time, right? That'll to your current state, because remember, Nebuchadnezzar had said, basically everything's going great, world's fine. That will give length of time, years, whatever, to your shlev, to your salva, to your peace and prosperity. Kol mata al Nebuchadnezzar Malka, but the entire dream is applied to Nebuchadnezzar the king. This is what Daniel has to say. Now, I am not, unfortunately, going today, by any stretch of the imagination, be able to deal with this last little piece that Daniel said. We'll deal with that in Yirtzeh Hashem next week. Hopefully this week, what we're going to do is we're going to see some parallels. So the first parallel that I wanted to bring is to also maybe help us to understand exactly when this happened. And that is that if you look at Yechezkel, which hopefully will reload. I actually am just bringing it in English. because I'm not teaching Sefer Yechezkel, so I don't need to go into each and every little word and explain, but there's a very striking nevuah that was given to Yechezkel. So it says in the 11th year, and Metzudah Tzion tells us the 11th year means the year of the Churban. This is the 11th year of Tzidkiyahu, and that's the year that the Churban takes place. So it hasn't taken place yet because it's on the first day of the third month. In other words, it's on Rosh Chodesh Sivan. But Yechezkel gets the following nevuah, and he's actually giving nevuah to Paro, but this is what it is. Who's comparable to you in greatness? Ashur was a cedar in Lebanon, beautiful branches, shady thickets, lofty stature, its top amongst the leafy trees. Waters nourished it, the deep made it grow tall, washing with its streams the place where it was planted, and making its channels well up till it helped to feed all the trees of the field. And it exceeded in stature all of the trees of the field. And its branches multiplied, and its boughs grew long because of the abundant water. And in its branches nested all the birds of the sky, and all the beasts of the field bore their young under its boughs, and in its shadow lived all the great nations. It was beautiful in its height and the length of its branches, because it stood by abundant waters, and cedars in the garden of God could not compare with it, right? In Gan Eden, or Gan Elohim, I think is the phrase in the Hebrew. Cypresses could not match its boughs. That's a different language, right? Plane trees, it's a different kind of tree, could not vie with its branches. There was no tree in the garden of God that was its peer in beauty. I, said God, I made it beautiful in the profusion of its branches, and all the trees of Eden envied it. And assuredly, thus said the Lord God, because it towered high in stature, it thrust up its top among the leafy trees. But then what happened? It was arrogant in its height. And I delivered it into the hands of the mightiest of the nations, and they treated it as befitted its wickedness, and I banished it. Not that I completely destroyed it, right? Not that I uprooted it, but that I banished it from what it was. Strangers, this most ruthless of nations is, I didn't really see that in the Hebrew, right? Cut it down, abandon it, its branches fall, the boughs are splintered, it's completely cut down. Everybody departs from its shade, the birds of the sky, and it's left there. All that's left is just the little bit of the tree trunk is all that's left, and it's together with the beasts of the fields. Okay. So it goes on somewhat. And because Yechezkel is actually giving nevuah to Paro, etc., it doesn't, the way that his nevuah then shifts is not the same. But the point is that Yechezkel got the same vision, in a sense, right, of this tree that became mightier than all the other trees, that reached out, that everything was dependent on it, everything was nourished by it, and then it was cut down. All right? And he identifies that tree with Ashur. Now, Nebuchadnezzar is the king of Bavel, not Ashur, and in fact, his rule starts when he conquers Ashur. But we keep bumping into, Malbim brought it, Ramat Valley brought it. I was teaching the Targumim of Megillat Esther this week, and lo and behold, Targum Sheni brings the same thing, that we have some either Masorah or Medrash that says that Nebuchadnezzar had originally been one of Sancherib, who was the king of Ashur, one of Sancherib's generals. All right. And that when Sancherib's army was destroyed, when they were besieging Yerushalayim, this is during the time of King Chizkiyahu and during the time of Yeshayahu, the Navi. At that time, what had happened was that there was only one, there were only 10, depends on which version you read. There were some very small number of people who survived, I suppose, so that they could give testimony so that everybody would know what actually happened to Sancherib's army. And one of those people was Nebuchadnezzar, right, which makes him very old. But ignoring the fact that this makes him very old, because it was 150 years earlier, ignoring the fact that it makes him very old. And I've been asking people, by the way, including Yehudis, but I've been asking all sorts of people if anybody can explain to me why it is that Chazal think it's so important that Nebuchadnezzar is both identified with Ashur and then later is identified with Bavel. And I think maybe this is also part of it, is that this is Ashur or this is Bavel? Who is this? Okay. There's another nevuah that we're also going to take a look at. The Ramad Valley turned me on to, which is nevuah from Yeshayahu to the king of Bavel. Now, again, there's asynchrony or anti-synchrony, something going on here. In fact, and I'm not teaching Sefer Yeshayahu, but in fact, in Sefer Yeshayahu, there are a number of his nevuot which were for the people of his generation and for the king of his time, etc. And it's like very much here and now, or talking about the near future, or the stuff dealing with Sancherib and all these different things. Okay. That's maybe about a third to a half, I think more like a third of the Sefer. There's a large part of Sefer Yeshayahu, which is nevuah about the future, the relative. Now, for us, it's the past. I would say it's maybe, we'll call it a third. I don't think that it quite, like that you can count the number of psukim and do it quite that way. So there's the one part that was really very much for the people of his time, trying to get them to do tshuva, discussing things with Chizkiyahu, trying to help Chizkiyahu take the steps that he needed to take to further things in the right direction. And eventually, and Chizkiyahu was like holding back against some things because he also had a degree of Ruach HaKodesh, not Nevuah, but a degree of Ruach HaKodesh. And he was so concerned because he saw that Menashe, the wicked king, was going to be his son. And so he was trying to avoid that and all that sort of stuff. So there's that chunk of Sefer Yeshayahu. There's the chunk of Sefer Yeshayahu that deals with Achrit Hayamim, that deals with the days of Mashiach that should come to us in peace and in joy and soon. And then there's the third, let's say, of the Sefer that deals with Churban Beit Rishon. And that part, as well as the part dealing with Achrit Hayamim, was not actually public nevuah during his lifetime. He had essentially a school for Nevi'im. He tried to help other people reach the level of nevuah. And there were times when he would prophesy there, and that they would write down his prophecies. And those prophecies were sealed for at least 100, maybe even more years, because they were really aimed at the time of Yirmiyahu, the time of Yechezkel, etc. They were aimed at the end of the Beit Rishon, and then there's also the other ones that are mamash for Achrei Yamim that haven't taken place yet. And eventually, the Sefer Yeshayahu was edited. I think it may have been edited by Yirmiyahu, actually, and it was, and all of the various pieces of it were revealed, but in his lifetime, it wasn't necessarily. And so there are very interesting nuvuot, including one we're going to look at in chapter 14 of Yeshayahu, which is that he's addressing Melech Bavel. But there is no Bavel in the time of Yeshayahu. It doesn't exist. Not at all. Bavel comes into existence with Nebuchadnezzar's destruction of Nineveh and the country of Ashur and the empire of Ashur. That's when Bavel comes into existence. So when Yeshayahu is addressing Melech Bavel, I mean, this doesn't exist yet. On the other hand, if you say, oh, but Nebuchadnezzar was actually already alive then, and okay, so I have, by no means do I have answers for all of these kinds of things. I have lots of questions, and I'm sharing my questions with you is what's going on here. But so now we've at least gotten through how Daniel told us what was going on with this huge tree. And so let's act, you know what? And I closed that screen, but I'm gonna reopen that window. You can see how I open stuff up. And I'm gonna open it up and we're gonna look at so I'm going to look at Sfaria, and we'll look at Tanakh, and we'll look at Sefer Yeshayahu, and we'll go to chapter 14. And then we'll go and we'll look at Ramat Valley and stuff, how what extra things he has to tell us along the way about this tree, about this dream, and everything. Okay, I went too far because I'm in Ketuvim. I need, whoops. Here we are. Here we go. Sefer Yeshayahu, and we need Perek Yadalet. Okay, chapter 14. I thought it was chapter 14. Excuse me. Yes, chapter 14. Maybe it doesn't start at the beginning of chapter 14 because it starts. Oh, I know what it is. I'm sorry. It actually starts in chapter 13. Okay. In chapter 13, this is one of those really scary ones. In chapter 13, it says, right, about Babylon. Put it into Hebrew instead of English. Masa Bavel. Okay, so that's this Babylon pronouncement. Somewhere in here, it actually said that, he addresses Melech Bavel. And he's addressing the king of Bavel. And, right, and so we saw, right? It says that, but in the end, God's going to have mercy also on Yaakov, and he will re-choose Israel, etc. So this is the law about this entire period. But it says on the day that Hashem permits you out. Okay, is this part to us, or is this part to some extent? This is a nevuah to us. Okay, that God's going to give us rest from the hard times, and He's going to take this vengeance, as it were, against the others. And then he says, but then he turns. At some point in here, I'd found the pasuk exactly the right way before, and now I'm not finding it. I apologize. But he basically turns and he starts not addressing Am Yisrael. He turns back again and he's addressing Bavel. In other words, he's addressing Nebuchadnezzar, and he says, "In the end, Eich nefalta mishamayim, how you fell. You used to be towering, right? And you were this great." This great towering figure, the towering kingdom, whatever it was, Hurad Sha'ol Gonecha, and your pride is brought down to the pit. How you have fallen from the heavens. And you had said, this is where we're going to see this in Ramat Valley shortly. This is right. And Yeshayahu is speaking to Melech Bavel. Okay, you had said in your heart, I'm going to go up to the heavens above and to the stars, and I'm going to lift up my chair, my throne, and I'm going to sit on the Har Moed B'Yarkei Tzafon. I'm going to be in, right, whether it's Shlomo's throne, whatever, it's me. It's all me. It's all about me. Okay. Okay, I'm going to go up onto the high places. The rest of humanity, they're not worthy for me to dwell among them. I'm going to have this place that's like in the clouds for me to dwell in, because I'm so above and beyond, right? Does this sound like Nebuchadnezzar, this person who created that pestle that he made everybody bow down to, that was gold because he was the head of gold? He was given the job of destroying the Beit HaMikdash because Rahman al-Zlan, our sins had made it to the point that we were not re'oi to still have it. And if anything, having the Beit HaMikdash was preventing us from doing tshuva. I mean, hard to believe that it could do that, but they had the mistaken notion that as long as they had the Beit HaMikdash, nothing really bad could happen to them. And if nothing really bad could happen to them and they weren't afraid of punishment, then they could do whatever the heck they wanted to do. And they were. And they weren't improving their ways. In fact, they were making things, the situation, the way they were treating one another, and treating the poor and treating the ger, etc., was getting worse and worse and worse. And so the Beit HaMikdash, as it were, was preventing them from, this place that was supposed to be a source of justice and a source of recognition of God's presence in the world. Instead of it helping them to be better people. It was essentially giving the ones who wanted it to be that way. They were taking it as giving them permission to do whatever they wanted to do, because after all, God has their back. So the Beit HaMikdash had to be destroyed, and it was. Okay. And, and they figured they could worship whatever kind of gods they wanted also, by the way, because on the one hand, like they had this connection with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, but there were these other gods that if you worshiped them in this particular way, like it's as though they were trying to control. They were trying to control God by giving the right sacrifices and this, that, and the other. Like they had their hands on the controls of the world. And they used Avodah Zorah and various kinds of sorcery, witchcraft, whatever it was, different kinds of things like that. They used that because forces of Tumah, because they were trying to get everything the way they wanted it to be. That was what was going on, Rahman al-San, particularly among the powerful in Yehuda. In Malchut Yehuda. And so things were going from bad to worse. And so it's not that they weren't also worshiping God, but they were trying to control all of it. Like that was where the destruction really comes from. And Nebuchadnezzar was meant to be God's tool. Okay, and had he recognized himself as solely doing what the king of the universe, okay, the one who appoints you to be king or takes the job away from you, whatever, if he would have recognized it, that it was limited to that, and that it wasn't about him, it was about the job that needed to get done, he would have been in a whole lot better shape. But he also fell ill, as it were, to the same illness that Am Yisrael had. And he became more and more arrogant. And so this mighty tree that has the possibility of providing home and food and shelter for all the beings of the world, that's what was that originally, right? What's originally Arzei V'Non, that was the Beit HaMikdash. And he was told to cut it down, and he did, but he put himself in its place. And that's what the dream is telling him, is you put yourself in the place. That doesn't work, man. It doesn't work. All right. So now I would like, now that I've given you some of these other parallels, and so the question is does this happen? This dream, this prophecy that Yechezkel gets in the year of the Chorban, so. The question is how much beyond the year of the Chorban does this take place? Does Nebuchadnezzar's own dream take place? And the fact that the words are different words, well, first of all, Yechezkel was prophesying in Hebrew, and Nebuchadnezzar was writing his letter in Aramaic. And secondly, we know even when people get full out nevuah, two people get nevuah, nobody sees it exactly the same way as anybody else, and they don't use the same language for the prophecy. And so, excuse me, I've made myself a concoction to try to cover my cough, and it seems to be working because I haven't coughed since I started this shiur, so that's good. Thank you. Well, I mean, Baruch Hashem, I think in a lot of ways, I'm mostly better, but the cough has been getting worse. And so I got a friend to give me some suggestion as to what I could put together, because I don't get to talk to my doctor until Thursday. So it's like, well, if I have to wait until Thursday, I need something to deal with this cough between now and Thursday. It's a shame, by Thursday I'll be better, and then there won't really be much to talk to the doctor about. But we will see what we will see. Okay, so now we're back in, actually, and I don't even want to be in Sefer Daniel anymore. I mean, I do, but I don't. What I want, I did a stop share instead of a new share. All right, fine. I get to see you bigger. That's good. And then I do want to do a new share. I want to share to Ramat Valley. Okay, so that you can see the text from Ramat Valley. And here you see this phrase that I highlighted. That was like the last thing that I was doing in there. The phrase that I highlighted was specifically because it was clear to me that he had quoted a verse, but he didn't tell me which verse he quoted. So he quoted, that was the verse from Isaiah chapter 14, verse 14. Okay, that this is, and we'll get back to this in a minute. Okay, so let's go up and let's just enjoy pieces through Ramat Valley. All right. So from the beginning, some of it we did already. Okay, so starting with about Pasuk Zayin, that's around where the dream is being, where Nebuchadnezzar's finally getting around to explaining in his letter, he's explaining the dream to Daniel. And Ramat Valley says, and I'm so sorry that we didn't get this done a couple of weeks ago when it was really Tu B'Shvat, but we did mention that there were parallels going on there. He says it's already known that Hadam Domel Le'etz HaSadeh, right? That's the famous phrase. Okay, why? Because Holech Godel, like a tree, right? A person starts off small, gets big, and it makes fruit like a tree. Now, whether you mean fruit like children and grandchildren, or whether you mean fruit because you have years of productive use, but you make fruit like a tree. And if someone dies before his time, it's like he's cut off, nitzatz, like a tree. And if he dies in his correct time, he's also similar to a tree, because trees also die at the end. From old age, the wood becomes sort of softer and it doesn't hold them up as well, and all these different things, right? And so therefore, this king, what's the word for him? It's like he made a metaphor, a parable for himself, who's being, in other words, he's being compared. We'll just say he's being compared to the tree. So that's why the tree appears to him in his dream. Okay, that the tree takes the place of his essence. He sees himself. His first dream that we heard about, he saw all the nations, right? He saw all of human history basically in the form of a human, and himself as the head of gold. Here, he's seeing just himself, and it's this tree that is so high that it reaches up to the heavens. Okay? Because, and part of this says, now the Ramat Valley is taking this to like such other places, right? He says to us, look, this particular king is the head of the klipa. There's the side of Kedusha, and there's the side of Tumah. And Nebuchadnezzar, like any human being, has the opportunity to choose, but he chooses to stay on the side of the klipa. He's very smart. He's very bright. He recognizes God. We keep seeing that over and over again. But he, like the people who eventually caused the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, okay, he made the same errors that they did. And he's the Rosh of the Klipa. He's the Rosh of the Klipa. All right. And so he sees himself as this towering tree. All right. But the Klipa can be also close to Kedusha. And so it has both. And initially, this king, so I'm trying to see where he says it. It's like, I don't want to have to go deal with his Aramaic. I want to just do the parts that he has that are here in Hebrew. He keeps switching back and forth. So he says, by means of these influences of holiness itself, that's what brought this tree to be rooted where it was, and to be and eventually to be able to grow as high as it could grow. And why this non-Jewish king was able to root himself in such a tree. And that's what it says, that the tree was, remember, and these are the words that we saw in the dream, Ravi Lana Takif, that the tree was great and mighty, and that its top reached to the heavens. And Daniel had said to him, right, and you are a great and mighty king, right? And what's the secret, though, that's behind that? So he says the secret that's behind that is because Shegia ad El Ha'achoraim, he got to the backside, as it were, of the Ze'er Anpin. So now all of a sudden we're talking language that I can read the words and not going there, but the Ze'er Anpin of the Bria. In other words, he wasn't addressing it straight on from Kedusha. If he were, the tree would never have needed to be cut down. He understood things, but he was trying to get at them from the back side of them, as it were. And for this reason, HaKadosh Baruch Hu calls him Nebuchadnezzar Avdi. He calls Nebuchadnezzar my servant. Okay? Because even though he's a servant and of the externality, he's still rooted in the same place. Okay? And so when it says that I saw L'sof kol ara, I saw till the end of all the world, right? Because his kingdom, Lamata nishtara, nishtaveh, his kingdom down below was essentially equated with the way where it was rooted up above. And therefore, his rule was over the entire world, because that's the place where he was rooted from. That's if you could raise up his netzots to its shoresh, that's where its shoresh was. Okay? And even the supernal angel that was in charge of him, okay, its level was above the level of all of the other sarim in the heavens, of all the other lands. And so he was able to conquer all of them. And then there was other stuff the Ramad Valley said about some of these other things, right? Like, what about the fact that in its branches, right, all of the birds of the heavens would dwell? So the birds of the heavens, that references Am Yisrael. And the angels that were revealed along with the Shekhinah, or that were appointed, right, along with the Shekhinah to protect and take care of Am Yisrael in Galut Bavel. That's who these birds are that have to dwell in his branches. Okay, and that Mine Yatzin called Bisra, that I don't know if I can get rid of the blueness. We may just have to deal with the blueness. Okay, we'll deal with the blueness, and that all the animals, all flesh was getting sustenance from this tree. So he says, why does it say that? Earlier, it had already said Umazan L'Kolabe, that there's food for everything, everyone within this tree. So what's the two difference? Rather that he saw that the hashpah was dividing, okay, and going from the potential to being actualized. Okay, so to say that Mazon L'Kolabe, that just says there's the potential for everybody to get food. And here, Minei Yatzin Kol Bisra, that means that it actually worked out that way. Okay, and so and it also, okay, right. So that's what he was saying with that part. And then he goes on and he says, okay, so he saw the tree and how great it was and what its the success of the tree. Well, I mean, what could be more successful for a tree than to grow as tall as you can, to give shade to the whole world? So, like, that's the success of the tree, right? So that appeared. So then what appears to him in the dream is that there was a messenger, right, that Irva Kaddish, who comes down from the heavens and announces in a great voice that the tree should be cut down and all of its branches, and it should be felled, and it should be lost, and its fruit should be lost. And all of this is hinting at the downfall of the king, who took, and I'll do my best to explain this, but okay, he took all of the orot hamakifin shelo, all of the energy that is surrounding him. Shayu meginin alav, the things that were supposed to be protecting of him. Okay, and that were adding to the beauty of the tree, right? And even that hashpah, that's lost. And that's caused him, right? And that's therefore caused him that his rulership over all the nations should also be taken away. Okay, and so then, and he's the one who tells me that, and his kingdom was given to Evel Merodach, his son, for those 7 years. When he was mishumem, he was like dumb, like a beast, and while he received his punishment. All right, but because he's going to come back and be king again. Okay, so that's why it doesn't say to actually uproot the roots, but that the roots should be left. Because what's the most important thing that's going on here? If you stop and think about it, it's not, if all that God did was to humble the mighty, and then somebody else comes and takes his place, he feels like, okay, fine, but He got to be that great and big. I get to be that. What God wants to have happen is exactly what's happening in this letter, right? Because what is Nebuchadnezzar? Nebuchadnezzar is not writing this letter before the punishment falls on him. Okay, we haven't gotten to the end of the letter yet. We got through the first part of it. And the first part of it includes, at the very, very end, it includes Daniel's suggestion to Nebuchadnezzar as to how to push off this punishment. And in fact, he does put it off for some length of time, and that's what we're going to hear in the rest of the chapter. And so I'm giving away a little bit, but it's important to understand that Nebuchadnezzar is going to undergo this punishment. The reason that you don't just uproot Nebuchadnezzar and put somebody else, let somebody else be in his place, is that you don't learn from that. He doesn't learn from that, but more importantly, the world doesn't learn from that. What we need to see is that the mighty are humbled and that they recognize that their humbling is because of their earlier arrogance. Otherwise, it doesn't really do any good. Okay, it doesn't do them any good, and it doesn't do the world any good because the lesson won't be learned from it. So that's why his root is left. Okay, and that's why his root is left. Everything leaves from under his dominion and shifts to being under his son of Merodach, but then it comes back to him. Okay, and that's what the Ramat Valley is telling us, and that's why. Okay, so I think I've told you some of this. So the first part of the stuff on verse 12, I've told you from the outside. And then Ramat Valley has this next piece that I thought was amazing. And he says, what's this business about? Like, why does the trunk of the tree, or maybe it's already shifted into being like some kind of an animal, like why is it bound up, right? Asur di farzel nachash, why is it bound up in iron and bronze? Like, what's the point of that? And he tells us something that's really pretty amazing. It says, Chazal, it's known, okay, that the sins of a person are what trap him. And the wicked person, and the pasuk goes on, et harasha, right? His sins, yilkadono et harasha. The sins are what trap the wicked person. Ubechevle chatato yitmach. And in the bounds of his different kind of word for sin, right? Chatan, he is supported. Yitmach, he's supported. So Ramat Valley says, this is exactly what Chazal said. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives koach to the wicked so that they can accept, or so that they can survive their punishment, right? In other words, there are times when the punishment is so severe that if God didn't give them extra power to be able, and extra strength to be able to survive it, they would die immediately. Okay, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not a sadist, right? It's not that he wants them to live long. I mean, there were stories in the Inquisition and other bad times in Jewish history where, and not necessarily just within Jewish history, but where there were wicked people who wanted to prolong the suffering of of their victims. Akash Baruch Hu doesn't want to prolong the suffering, but Akash Baruch Hu wants them to suffer long enough to clean up their act, or long enough that they can learn their lesson. Okay? And so he gives strength to the Rishayim in order that they can get their Poranut. And this strength is in order to support them, that they can live through it and not die because of how severe the Yisurim that are coming upon them are, and the judgments that are lined up against them. And this is what the pasuk says, what it says when it says, "Ubechavlei chatato yitmach," in the bounds of its sin, his sin, he is supported. Okay? And furthermore, in almost every case, tomchan al yedei haparnasa, supporting them by means of normal kind of parnasa, shelo techsar lehem, that they shouldn't be lacking in parnasa, because the ikar of the chiyud comes from that side. Now, for this king, who should, it's a beautiful Aramaic phrase, yarad mi'igra rama lebira mikta. Okay, who went down from the highest height, Igra Rama lebira mikta, into the pit, the deepest pit. The phrase has been taken, by the way, in modern Hebrew, and they reverse it for there's some organization that supports people who dealt with like mental illness and things like that, and they've reversed the phrase, and they say mibira mikta leigra rama, from the deepest pit of depression, that you to believe that you can get to the heights again. And so that's the name of the support organization. But so therefore, his parnasa, which was switched from the ma'achal of a person to the ma'achal of an animal, right? Because he's being brought all the way down. But at the same time, that's also, by the way, why his seichel has to go away from him. Because Ramat Valley says people can't. He explains very beautifully, right? We have the pasuk that we say, "Potecha tzedakah maspil chol chai ratzon." You fulfill for every living thing its ratzon, that what it desires. Humans don't want to be crawling around on all fours eating grass. Many human beings, certainly a Nebuchadnezzar kind of human being, would rather die than have that happen to them. That would be so degrading. And so that's why, according to the Ramat Valley, it had to take away the mochin of the man. He couldn't have survived the punishment had he still had the mochin, the understanding of a man, of a human. Because if he had that, he wouldn't have been able to survive the degradation of eating the grass, etc. He was aware of it, that it was going to happen, and he was aware of it after the fact when he comes back to himself. But at the time, it was actually a big chesed from Kadosh Baruch Hu to give him the mochin of an animal. All right? And so the Ramat Valley goes on and he says, look, people, and he says, anyway, so yeah, so he was the one, he was saying that the potech tzedakah must be a whole haratzon. That's right here. Okay. That since HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives each bria its food according to its desire. Okay. In other words, according to the kind of dot that it has. So the ratzon of a person is, because particularly with respect to people, maybe not with respect to other kinds of animals or other kinds of creatures, but for a human, his ratzon is dependent on his da'at. And so this king, that it was decreed upon him that he was going to be sustained with animal food, okay, in order to subdue his pride and to make him realize that it's all in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's hands. It's not in his own hands. Okay, so it was necessary to remove from him the mochin, the seat of consciousness of a human, and put into him only the mochin of an animal, so that he would be able to survive the 7 years. And then this is where Ramat Valley turned me on to that part in Yeshayahu, which was, he says perhaps. He doesn't even say for sure. He just says perhaps. What are these 7 years? Okay, so I mean, it's an interesting question, right? Maybe 1 year would have been enough. Maybe 1 month would have been enough. Like, how long does it take? Why did it take 7 years? It's not like he had human consciousness that was slowly but surely getting beaten at, or getting that he was thinking about it and changing and being able to slowly but surely like do tshuva on it. Like, there was no human consciousness there. Why 7 years? Why not 3 years? Like, it, while it's happening, it's forever. And when it's over, well, he didn't have consciousness of it as it was happening. When it's over, it's over. Okay, so what was the purpose of the 7 years? And so Ramat Valley suggests, and he says, perhaps, right, ulai. This is against these 7 degrees of, see, one possibility is the 7 degrees of Kedushin. Okay, that this Russia thought to make himself more, haughtier. In other words, to put himself above all these 7 levels of the Kedushin, remember, are these kinds of angels. Okay. And what's the verse? Ela, I'm going to go up. Al, Bamate, Av, Edmeh, Le'elyon. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's actually only 6 words. But Uma Hashivulo, and what I didn't go through all of the psukim there in Yeshayahu because I knew Ramat Valley was going to go through them for us. And he says, and so what did they answer him? Right? That's what he says. I'm going to go up and I'm going to be higher, 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 above this level, above that level, above the next level, right? The 7 heavens. We talk about it as the 7 heavens. Ramat Valley is talking about it as these levels of Kedushin. Different levels, different kind. And what did they answer him? Ach el Sheol, the like hell. To Raj, you'll be brought down. El Yarchte Bor, to the extent, the extensions of the pit. The Adraba Yared Meigra Rama Labiramita. Again, we see you're not going to go up. Don't think you're going to go up. Rather, you're going to be brought from the highest height down to the lowest pit, from the mochin of a king to the mochin of an animal, and similarly with the food. Okay, from the fancy gourmet, refined food of a king to the gas, the not even vulgar, but coarse, that's the right word, the coarse food of an animal. Okay. And so since there's a Beit Din Shalmala, how are we holding on time? Wow, way past the time. right? When you got on a little late, but it's already past 7 on this clock. Okay, so Ramad Valley has more to say, but at least we did the big chunk that I wanted, which is at least I caught up. We got to hear how Daniel understood what the dream is. We got to hear some of the parallels. And so maybe we have a sense that this happened shortly after he had destroyed the Beit HaMikdash. And we got to hear some of how the Ramad Valley teaches us about what's going on with this dream, what it actually is referencing for us, what it's and I've been talking already, not necessarily all of it from inside, but that the purpose of the punishment, etc., is to bring him down from his haughtiness in a way that he will acknowledge it, so that he can help to give the lesson to the next generation of humans, to the next generation of Jews. So, till the end of time, that we can look at him and say, you have, God is the one who is in charge. And he eventually comes out able to say that when he gets out the other end of this. So we're going to, hear about the rest of that the next time. Halavai, we should know that. And it's so interesting to me, because so far of all of the pieces and all of the stories that are in Sefer Daniel, I think in some ways this is one of the most important ones for all of us. And I think it's probably the least well-known of the stories. I think it's, for me, it's the least well-known of the stories, like that Nebuchadnezzar turned into an animal and then came back. Like, I don't remember that. And that he internalized the lesson that he was supposed to learn from it, and that changed how he ruled for the remainder of his rule. Like, that part didn't stick with me. And I hope that it sticks with anybody who listens to this, because I think it's probably one of the most important stories and lessons to come out of the Sefer. I am very happy to see you. I'm going to stop the share and I'm going to stop the live stream.